It was so complex, 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground.
The administration pulled the trigger on step one of their plan in Venezuela without figuring out how they're going to follow through on steps 2 to 10.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From the ongoing fallout over U.S. intervention in Venezuela to lawmakers marking 5 years since the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top stories. The U.S. has dropped the number of vaccines recommended for every child. The federal government no longer broadly recommends shots for flu, rotavirus, hepatitis A and B, some meningitis, and RSV. Those vaccines are now only recommended for high-risk groups or if doctors suggest them. Medical experts say the change could increase preventable diseases. Columbus police are searching for a person of interest after a dentist and his wife were shot to death in their home last week. Security cameras captured an unidentified person walking through a nearby alley during the time of the crime. 37-year-old Spencer Tepe and his 39-year-old wife Monique were found dead December 30th. Investigators believe they were killed between 2 and 5 in the morning. The couple's 2 young children were inside the home but were not injured. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is shutting down after Congress ended its federal funding. The CPB board voted Monday to dissolve the organization that has funded PBS, NPR, and hundreds of radio and TV stations since 1968. Officials considered putting the organization in hibernation in case Congress restored funding, but the CPB president rejected that idea, saying it could create political manipulation. The decision affects public media outlets nationwide that have relied on CPB support for decades. Gunfire and anti-aircraft fire lit up the skies over Caracas overnight as Venezuela remains on edge after the U.S. captured President Nicolas Maduro. The Venezuelan officials say police fired at unauthorized drones and no confrontation occurred. Maduro and his wife pleaded not guilty to drug and weapons charges in U.S. court yesterday. This as President Trump says U.S. oil companies could get Venezuela's oil operations running in less than 18 months. Trump told NBC News the oil industry would spend a tremendous amount of money to repair Venezuela's aging infrastructure. He says the government or future revenue would reimburse those costs. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George joins us now live from Capitol Hill. And Joe, let's talk a little bit more about the path forward. What are the next steps now that this country is in a little bit of disarray?
Well, and that is an understatement, right? I mean, it is abundantly clear that President Trump believes that the American energy industry, oil executives, are going to sign off on the rebuilding, the remaking of the Venezuelan energy sector. For all of its reserves, remember, in Venezuela, what Venezuela has been blessed with from a natural resources standpoint, their energy sector just doesn't contribute much to the global supply. Only about 1% or so ultimately gets pumped into the global output. So there's a lot of potential there, but for the moment there also appears to be a lot of reluctance by the American energy sector. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But President Trump, he told NBC a few noteworthy things yesterday. One, he gave us a little bit of a timetable, right? 18 months. Now that, in the grand scheme of helping rebuild, remake a country, doesn't seem all that long, but 18 months is a year and a half. So this tells you that this is a president who isn't thinking about moving on to the next foreign policy quagmire in 6 weeks, 8 weeks time. 18 months is still a year and a half, and because deadlines move all the time, I mean, this is something that could consume most of the remainder of President Trump's presidency. So a noteworthy amount of time there. It doesn't look like we're going to be getting a call for elections in Venezuela anytime soon. And now to the quote about oil executives and where the money's coming from. Follow the money, right? It's an important part of any journalism, and so important on this story as well. The president telling Kristen Welker of NBC News, quote, "A tremendous amount of money will have to be spent And the oil companies will spend it, and then they'll get reimbursed by us or through revenue. Reimbursed by us is a phrase used by the president. That suggests perhaps there's going to be an American taxpayer component, a congressional piece of legislation component. And remember, here on Capitol Hill, members of Congress still have a litany of questions regarding President Trump's foreign policy goals. And now to the hiccup, if you want to call it that, the question mark. Will oil executives willingly jump headfirst back into Venezuela? Back in November, the CEO of Exxon said to Bloomberg News in an interview, remember, to paraphrase the CEO of Exxon, remember, American oil executives, companies, we were already in Venezuela decades ago, and then the Venezuelan government changed their thinking. Kicked them out, essentially, nationalized the oil fields, and the American industry lost billions of dollars in that process because of the instability in Venezuela right now. Just because they have an acting president and just because President Trump says we're in charge of Venezuela, that may not be enough for oil executives to feel really secure about investing billions of dollars. And it will take a tremendous amount of money, as President Trump said, to rebuild this energy sector. There may be a concern about what happens in 1 year's time, 2 years' time. What if the government collapses again? What if the energy sector gets nationalized again? And then who's on the hook for all of this investment? Clearly, Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, who's a cabinet member of President Trump, has close ties to the oil industry. He's going to be a major player in trying to recruit the American energy industry to get back into the market of Venezuela. It's clearly a key component for what's next when it comes to Venezuela for President Trump, Holly.
And Joe, I know that yesterday gave us the first chance to see Maduro and his wife. They were in court, and also to hear from lawmakers about the operation. What are you hearing from both sides of the aisle there?
Right. The Maduro saga is in many ways a different track now than the Venezuela saga, right? What happens to this man who was the de facto leader of Venezuela just a few days ago? Can he beat these charges in the courtroom? Remember, his defense, it's not guilty, and he's alleging that he's been kidnapped. So we'll see where the legal process plays out and whether or not any more jurisdictions jump on board. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is openly teasing on social media the idea that Maduro could face state charges at the state level in the state of Florida. Remember, it happens frequently in which someone may face federal charges at the federal level, and then a state may impose charges of their own. Governor DeSantis is teasing that on social media. So the Maduro saga is far from over. The Venezuela saga has a lot of question marks attached to it. Senior members of Congress were briefed yesterday for multiple hours on Capitol Hill by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and others. More members of Congress still, though, want their briefings. They're expected to get it sometime this week. Democrats, Republicans, they're falling among familiar fault lines. Democrats seem very unhappy with what the administration has presented them so far. Many of them believe they needed to be consulted prior to this operation in Venezuela. Remember, the president is very careful to say he doesn't believe we're at war with Venezuela. That's what the president said yesterday in an interview. That's important because only the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. So the president's being careful there. Others are saying if capturing a foreign leader isn't war, then what is? So there's clearly questions on that front. Here's Senator Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, who's often critical of American intervention in other countries around the world. This is what he told reporters late yesterday.
Apparently this attack's been under planning for 3 or 4 months, and so there's plenty of time to ask Congress's permission. I think it's disdainful, but I don't think he's the first president to do it. I mean, many people will point out all of them do it. So this is a bipartisan problem. I'm glad that there's a significant debate and that we will have a vote on this, but without question, this is war. Well, I wasn't for the invasion. If you want to make it better, you should be saying as soon as possible, this is your country. We're going to let you make decisions on the oil. We aren't coming to take your oil. We aren't coming to tell you what to do. It will have the opposite of the intended effect. It will drive a wedge between us and potential future leaders of Venezuela. So I hope it will stop.
But as is the case and has been the case throughout this second administration, senior congressional leaders, Republican leaders, seem to be still supporting the Trump administration on this front. There is this big question as to whether Congress needed to be informed or not. Speaker Mike Johnson still standing by the Trump administration. Take a listen.
This was one that did not require prior authorization by Congress. It just required notification. And all the administration officials did exactly what they were supposed to do on the timetable they're supposed to do it in. They have been on the phone constantly with members of the House and Senate, and they'll continue to provide further information. We'll get a lot more here today. But our understanding and my appreciation of this entire thing is it was completely authorized by law. It's well within Article 2.
One storyline we'll be watching a little bit later in the week. In the U.S. Senate, it is expected that a war powers resolution vote will come up. We're tracking that potentially for Thursday, Holly. That would limit President Trump's ability to conduct additional military operations in Venezuela. These war powers resolutions, they come up from time to time. It previously failed in December. Unclear now in this post-Maduro world whether the Senate would advance this or not. Lawmakers, chief among them, Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, Senator Rand Paul, and others are talking about other votes on other countries in the near future as well. Remember, the Trump administration openly talking about Cuba, Colombia, Greenland, potentially being other targets by the foreign policy agenda of President Trump. So it's become a busy week here on Capitol Hill reacting to the fall of Maduro, Holly.
Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George for us. Thanks, Joe. Straight ahead on Today As It Happened.
They want to make it perfectly clear that I am not allowed to say what I think. And that's dangerous.
You're watching Today As It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's dive right back in. Right now, Senator Mark Kelly is speaking to the press one day after the Department of Defense moved to demote him and cut his retirement pay. Kelly was one of 6 Democratic lawmakers who released a video in November urging service members and members of the intelligence community to defy illegal orders. So let's listen in.
Yesterday, I received this letter that censures me and threatens to reduce me in rank after 25 years in the United States Navy, flying 39 combat missions, 4 times in space, decades in service, threatening to reduce my rank, so demote me because of something I said, something that was clearly lawful. Also something, by the way, that Secretary Hegseth has said on multiple occasions back in 2016. So this is certainly the height of hypocrisy. I think it's also important to point out that in this letter, where you might have thought it was just about the video, we find out it's not just about the video that we made. This is also about other things I've said. Like, they think I don't have the right to criticize them when they fire admirals and generals. It is specifically in here on the first page. And to say that they have surrounded themselves with a bunch of yes men. I think that's a fact, especially in the White House. So this is over an extended period of time that they want to make it perfectly clear that I am not allowed to say what I think. And that's dangerous. Every other retired service member, like me, or every veteran, every active duty service member, maybe every U.S. citizen is going to say, hey, if they can criticize and stop, a United States senator from doing his job and speaking out, what does that mean for the rest of us? So this is really concerning. We're going to, do what we can and, fight this with, every tool that we have. But this is what Secretary Hegseth did in sending this letter is an erosion of every U.S. citizen's First Amendment rights.
And now let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day.
Opening statements underway today in the trial of a former Uvalde school police officer. Adrian Gonzalez is charged with child abandonment, allegedly for failing to protect students during the 2022 Robb Elementary School shooting. Gonzalez was among the first officers to respond. Authorities waiting 77 minutes to confront that gunman. By then, 19 students and 2 teachers were dead. Gonzalez faces up to 29 counts and up to 2 years in prison if convicted. The trial is expected to last 2 weeks. The Trump administration is freezing $10 billion in federal funds to 5 Democratic states. Minnesota, New York, California, Illinois, and Colorado, all of them will lose money for child care, cash assistance, and social services. The Health and Human Services Department claiming massive fraud in those states, but providing no evidence to support those charges. The freeze affects programs serving hundreds of thousands of low-income households. Democrats call it political retribution that punishes the poor. Wyoming's Supreme Court striking down the state's abortion ban today keeps the procedure legal there. The justices ruling 4-1 that the state's laws violate the Constitution's healthcare decision-making amendment. The state's only abortion clinic and advocacy groups challenging the bans. The Republican governor there, Mark Gordon, says he now wants lawmakers to pass a constitutional amendment banning abortion for voters to decide.
This is Today as It Happened. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us on Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer with your daily look at the day's biggest stories.
It's been nearly 3 weeks since the Justice Department was required by law to turn over all documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. Some of the documents were released, but most were not. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live in New York now with the very latest. And Alex, how is the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, explaining such a massive delay when we're talking about millions of documents?
We are. The Attorney General was supposed to release all of the documents by December 19th. We got a handful of those on that day and some after that, but we are now learning that we have really just seen a fraction of the documents that we are supposed to have already received. That number is at 1%, and essentially what the Attorney General is saying is that they are on document overload right now. Remember, they had at least a couple of months heads up that this was going to happen. But they say that they have still only weeded through 1% of the documents they needed. Looking at the numbers on this, they say that they so far have dropped 12,285 documents that amount to some 125,000 pages. Now, then they say that that is out of some 2 million documents that needed to be dropped, and they sent a 5-page letter to the judge who just unsealed the documents relating specifically to Ghislaine Maxwell's case, explaining why they have not gotten anything done almost to this point. In this, they say that they are trying to weed through these documents, that they have some 400 lawyers right now looking at this from multiple different divisions, including the Southern District of New York, where the Maxwell case and one of the Epstein cases was, as well as the Southern District of Florida, the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice, as well as the National Security Division. They say that they also have 100 document analysts also going through this. But again, this is happening now more than 3 weeks, or roughly 3 weeks rather, after the deadline when they were supposed to release this document. They did in this letter, which really doesn't say a whole lot, even though it's 5 pages. They let them know which steps they are taking to make sure that this is done. If anything, they said they should have redacted more. Remember, a lot of the criticism we saw from that initial document dump was that entire pages were blacked out. I want to walk through what it looks like, how the process in which they are using to go through these documents. They say they're first uploading the documents that are covered by this act, then they're uploading them to a data review platform, and then they're manually reviewing the documents for victim identifying information, the required redactions under the Privacy Act, as well as privileged information. And then they say they're making those redactions and then engaging in 2 levels of quality control checks. First, they call it a global quality control check, and then they say there's a Southern District of New York specific control check. Then they're posting the materials, and then they say they're getting requests from victims and the public. They say there are hundreds of people on a list of what should be redacted. They say that they actually went into the documents that have already been released and added additional redactions to documents that have already been posted, but There is no deadline. In this 5-page letter, Del, they do not say when they are planning to have all of this done by. Again, 3 weeks after the deadline, they are only really responding to this one specific judge who unsealed the grand jury material specific to Ghislaine Maxwell. So still a lot of questions about what we are going to see and when.
Alex, question before I let you go. The fact that they're having such a difficult time releasing these documents and the volume that they're now talking about, does that fly in the face of earlier statements by the Attorney General that she had reviewed the case, the documents, the files, and that there was, in her words, and I'm paraphrasing here, but really nothing to see here?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, there was discussion about how many documents there would be, whether or not they were pertinent to the investigation, whether they needed to be seen by the public. And as we saw from the document dump on December 19th, they range decades. I mean, we saw documents from, just a couple of years ago all the way through 1996 when we saw that first document. And there are still millions that they need to sort through. Remember, not every document gives us a ton of information or a window into every, important detail, but all of them needed to be sorted through. And the law says no matter how important or seemingly how unimportant, all of them need to be released to the public.
Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live for us in New York. Alex, as always, we thank you.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
There's not a difference of opinion. This isn't a different perspective based on political party. There are facts and there are lies. America saw firsthand the video in real time, the brutal beating of police officers.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened, Scripps News end-of-day snapshot of our biggest stories. So let's pick up where we left off.
5 years ago, a violent mob stormed the Capitol. 1,400 officers were wounded, 1,600 people convicted. A woman died. Those who stormed the Capitol defaced the chamber inside. Among those charged and convicted, the former leader of the far-right group, the Proud Boys. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen is live now in our D.C. newsroom. And Stephanie, House Democrats holding a hearing today, basically to say never forget the anniversary, especially now 5 years later. What have we learned?
Hey, Del, good afternoon. Well, Democrats and Republicans have very different memories, very different representations of what happened on January 6th, 5 years ago. Democrats are now 3.5 hours into this unofficial hearing, since they are not in the majority in Congress. But it's House Democrats holding a hearing, talking to a police officer who was working at the Capitol on January 6th, talking to a former DOJ official who spent 2 years prosecuting a number of the rioters and ultimately resigned after President Trump pardoned nearly 1,600 of those involved with the January 6th riot and insurrection at the Capitol. And those pardons have been a big focus about what Democrats have been talking about in their hearing today. That hearing still going on live right now. It started with testimony from a police officer, that former DOJ official that currently right now testifying is Representative Mary Gay Scanlon. And that's what we've been hearing for, I'd say, about the last hour or so. We've been hearing testimony from a number of sitting members of the House of Representatives who were at the Capitol on January 6th, sharing their personal stories and recollections. Really, the point of this Democratic hearing is to try to push back against the rhetoric we're hearing from, some Republicans, from even the White House now, trying to say that this was a regular tourist visit to the Capitol, and the images and the video and the injuries and the deaths, I think, certainly demonstrate that it was not that. But there was one witness, I think, that was most interesting to me to hear from in that Democratic hearing was a member of the first panel, and she was one of the rioters at the Capitol on January 6th. But she is the only one who formally rejected the pardon from President Donald Trump, saying that she pled guilty, she knew she was guilty, and saying that she didn't deserve to be pardoned. And she is an outlier among those involved in the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. And there was a really notable moment in her testimony earlier today where she got a little emotional, and she took the time to apologize to the former Capitol police officer who was sitting at the other end of the table from her. And she really got a little bit emotional when she was doing that. I want you to take a listen.
I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart for being part of the mob that put you and so many officers in danger. I want the Capitol Police to know how truly grateful I am to them and how deeply sorry I am. I can't believe people are still disrespecting you and trying to lie about January the 6th. I will do everything I can to stop the lies about our brave officers like you who protected us during the attack.
So there are very different retellings of exactly what happened on January 6th. There's a group of attackers, even the former leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, held their own event on Capitol Hill today. They're marching from the Ellipse down to the Capitol, a small group of them, maybe a few dozen, that are trying to honor and remember January 6th in their own way. But Del, this is one of those days that is just so polarizing, and depending on which party line you fall under depends on how you look back on exactly what happened 5 years ago.
I was there that day and into the night. It's not a party line situation. It is a situation where you witness something you never thought you would see. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen for us live in our D.C. newsroom. Stephanie, as always, we thank you. Congressman Jason Crow is a combat vet, and his combat also included trying to survive the January 6th riot and death threats for standing up to President Trump afterwards. Democratic Congressman joins us now. And Congressman, thanks for being with us. 5 years ago, you stood in the breach as that violent mob attacked the Capitol. You heard me say I was there. 5 years later, though, there's an effort to erase that history. The president just this morning calling it a peaceful gathering. Your thoughts?
Del, your last comment just a moment ago where you said there's not a difference of opinion. This isn't a different perspective based on political party. There are facts and there are lies. America saw firsthand the video in real time, the brutal beating of police officers, the sheer brutality and violence of that day. That is the fact. Donald Trump and his minions are trying to sweep it under the rug. They're trying to change history and deny it happened. We will never allow that to happen because America knows what happened. I know what happened. You do. Everybody saw that, and that was a moment, a defining moment for our democracy that we cannot ever forget.
Congressman, we often talk about the insurrection and what it said about MAGA. I'm curious, 5 years later, have you wrapped your arms around what it says about us as a country? Because after all, 5 years ago, no one on Capitol Hill that day could have ever predicted that Donald Trump would win re-election. And yet, here we are.
That's right. Well, I've thought long and hard about January 6th and the years that have followed. I'm a combat veteran, as you mentioned, and when I was trapped in the House gallery on January 6th with a few dozen other members of Congress and that mob was trying to break down our barricades and our doors, I actually thought pretty long and hard about the fact that I'm a veteran, and on the other side of that door were other veterans who served with me, fought with me. My brothers and sisters took the same oath that I took. How did we end up on opposite sides of the same door? And it's a long story about division, about lies, about a president from the very top sowing division between Americans, dividing us against one another, taking control of communication, channels of communication, and using it to sow propaganda. We are still battling those forces to this day. That's why it's going to require an all-hands-on-deck moment for America, where we all have to stand up and retake our democracy and refocus on the truth, refocus on the rule of law, and make sure that we are standing in the breach against the assaults that this president is lodging against all of us.
Congressman, speak to the damage that's still being done. I was in the grocery store in Northern Virginia on Saturday. Ran into Mike Fanone. Said, Mike, I've known him ever since working the streets of D.C. as a reporter in 1985. It almost looked like he was shell-shocked, a veteran that was back from war that didn't want to remember the fact that he was in battle and almost seemed to be sheepish. And this is a guy that you talk about guts and glory. He had guts and glory. What does this speak to the fact that we still have officers right now that are still living with the trauma?
It's such a great point, Del. There are so many officers, over 140 officers who were brutally beaten, many more who dealt with the trauma from that day, as well as other staff, support staff, journalists such as yourselves. Hundreds of people were traumatized by this. America was traumatized by this because let's not forget it was their vote. It was their will that Donald Trump was trying to take and deprive from them. And they're being re-traumatized by Donald Trump. I mean, the White House just put out a statement. You can go on the White House website and see it if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it. But it talks about how this was simply a peaceful protest and the whole thing is a conspiracy and a lie. I mean, it's wild what this president is doing, re-traumatizing those officers. And I would equate it to the way that Vietnam veterans were treated when they came back from the war. When they were spat on, they couldn't talk about their experience. They were treated terribly by this country. I would hope that we had learned that lesson, that when people are traumatized, you don't re-traumatize them, that you actually gather around them, you listen to that experience, you accept that experience, and you figure out how we can move forward together. And that is exactly what we are trying to do, what House Democrats are trying to do today, and we hope that the rest of the country joins us.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
I think the president has demonstrated, at least already, a very strong commitment to peace through strength, and especially in this hemisphere. And I think Venezuela delivered or got that message loudly and clearly.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's dive right back in.
Venezuela is on the world stage right now, but peace talks between Ukraine and Russia continue. It's been 4 years now since that war began, and yes, those talks do continue. And today, officials from Ukraine are in Paris meeting with their allies to discuss security guarantees if Russia further invades its territories. Scripps News International correspondent Ross Cullen live right now from Paris. And Ross, did the countries dubbed the Coalition of the Willing give Ukraine what it needs?
Yeah, Del, this is the Élysée Palace, the French presidential office and residence. This is where the Coalition of the Willing talks were held on Tuesday. And just down the road from here, pretty much the next building along on this street, is the US Embassy. And the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner said that there have been hours of discussions with the US ambassador and the Ukrainian delegation already during the day, and they're going to continue this evening. So there's a lot for Washington and Kyiv to discuss bilaterally, but in terms of the broader Coalition of the Willing, they did agree these security guarantees for Ukraine, that the United States will help monitor the ceasefire, that there will be UK and French troops inside Ukraine. There was a declaration of intent, a signing today by the British Prime Minister and the French President. They will be deployed after any eventual peace agreement is signed, and there would also be long-term defence commitments for Ukraine. The Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said it was a big milestone and very important progress had been made here in Paris today.
Ross Cullen live for us from Paris. Ross, as always, we thank you. Venezuela saying at least 24 of its security officers were killed in that U.S.-led military ousted to arrest ousted leader Nicolas Maduro on Saturday. That brings the official death toll now to at least 56. Cuba saying 32 of its military and police officers were also killed. A growing number of civilians dead, but the exact number of civilians is not clear. Prosecutors saying they will investigate. Top lawmakers on Capitol Hill seem to be divided over that classified briefing on Venezuela. On Saturday, U.S. forces captured Nicolas Maduro during that raid. He's detained and now being held inside a New York City jail. Last night, Trump administration officials met with lawmakers for more than 2 hours as concerns over the situation continue to grow. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed joins us now live from Capitol Hill. And Nate, we heard the Democratic Senator Mark Warner calling the president's move imperialism. Are you getting the sense from Democrats that they agree?
Well, look, I think many Democrats stand in opposition to the latest move by the Trump administration by going into another nation, violating its sovereignty. They have a lot of outstanding questions about exactly how the U.S. will handle this situation from here on out. But it's interesting when you talk to Republicans, with few exceptions, Senator Rand Paul, we heard from him earlier today. He talked about how he had a lot of questions about what the U.S.'s level of involvement will look like moving forward. But when you hear from most Republicans, they have been defending the Trump administration largely and their decision to go into Venezuela, their decision to notify Congress after the fact. We heard today from the Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who told reporters that he is, happy with President Trump conducting this the way he did, and furthermore, that the purpose of this mission to underscore the fact that the U.S. wants to achieve peace through strength. There's been a lot of talk, Del, about how President Trump ran on, ending forever wars, being the peace president. Now Republicans on Capitol Hill saying, well, this is just part of a means to an end to achieve peace, broader peace in South America. Take a listen.
I think the president has demonstrated, at least already, a very strong commitment to peace through strength, and especially in this hemisphere. And I think Venezuela delivered or got that message loudly and clearly. And I think other countries in this hemisphere who are cooperating with narco-terrorists or in league with China and Russia and Iran and countries like that need to be on notice.
But if you listen to Democrats, they're left with more questions than answers. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was in that briefing yesterday with the select group of lawmakers and said he asked these questions to which he received, in his words, no good answers. Take a listen.
I asked 4 simple questions. How many American troops are we going to send to Venezuela? They don't know. How long will we be running Venezuela? Don't know. Unknown. How much is this going to cost? We tried to pin them down. No answer. What country is next? Unknown. But I was very unsatisfied when I asked them, are they considering going into other countries? It was really troubling.
And a lot of the analysts who've been looking into this say that if Venezuela can increase its oil exports up to 2.5 million barrels per day, that would be, a success. That would be their kind of maximum output in the short term. For context, though, the U.S. gets most of its foreign oil from Canada. That's 4 million barrels total per day. So, a lot of questions about just how feasible this is moving forward and how long it would take to get that capacity that President Trump has spoken of. Furthermore, the continuing outstanding questions of exactly what the U.S.'s goal was in Venezuela. Worth noting that a much larger group of lawmakers are going to have the opportunity to actually hear directly from the administration officials who briefed that select group of lawmakers, the Gang of 8, last night. They're expected to hold briefings for the whole House of Representatives and the whole Senate tomorrow morning.
Scripps News congressional correspondent Nate Reed on Capitol Hill for us. Nathaniel, as always, we thank you very much.
Del.
Let's go now to our political director, Andrew Rafferty, who joins me in studio. And Raph, I'm old enough to remember a movie called Wag the Dog. There was a president that was in trouble in the polls. He was sinking in the polls, so he started a war. I can't remember how it ended, but how did the polls say it's affecting this particular president?
Yeah, that we have seen traditionally a rally around the flag when we have seen big crisis that the country kind of goes and sort of supports a president who may not be so popular. We're not sure that that's actually happening right now. What exactly?
Just the film buff, that's all I can say.
Yeah, but we do have a little bit of insight. I expect these numbers are going to change as Americans learn a whole lot more about Venezuela, which was not on a lot of people's radars. There's really 3 polls so far that give us a good insight into what Americans are thinking, and we can put them on the screen. 2 out of the 3 have the exact same number. This is support specifically for capturing and removing Maduro. And of course, you look at one poll to the next, the wording of the questions can change. But I tried to look at stuff that was very similar, and you're seeing about a third of the country in the Reuters, Ipsos, and Economist YouGov. Washington Post is a little bit of an outlier where it's up to 40%, but Del, you know this as well as I. When you're talking about that 1/3 of the country, that's really the Trump ride or die, folks. There's really very few things that President Trump can do that would get support from less than a third of the country. Those are no doubt the MAGA base. And it's interesting to dig into these numbers too, because there's still a lot of Americans who aren't sure about how they feel about Venezuela. As I mentioned, we were talking about, we're coming off the holiday season. You and I are both football fans, so this happening on a Saturday out of some big games, probably not the country's undivided attention. But here's one thing to watch going forward, and we kind of heard from Nate in some of those clips from Democrats on Capitol Hill. there is real concern across the board, both from Republicans and Democrats, more so, of course, of Democrats, that this could lead to something more. So if we're okay right now with this idea of removing a dictator, of indicting someone, bringing him to the U.S. to face trial, there is much higher concern about that escalating, whether it be a long-term involvement from the U.S. in Venezuela, troops on the ground in Venezuela. And so that's why I imagine as this week progresses, we're going to hear a lot more from lawmakers who want answers about what the long-term goals are for the U.S. in Caracas.
Straight ahead on Today as It Happened.
Robots are getting a lot smarter and a lot more human-like. I'm business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett in Las Vegas. Coming up, I'll break down what they can actually do right now versus where the hype outpaces reality.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
Day 2 of CES, otherwise known as the Consumer Electronics Show. That's the show where companies get to show off their latest stuff. This year, companies are showing off their robots, and that got us thinking, are we moving closer to the Jetsons?
Rosie cooked. She cleaned. And she still finds time to play ball with Elroy.
Wow! Right in the basket.
Rosie is the ideal maid.
Business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett is live for us in Las Vegas. And Maura, let me tell you, I'm jealous, first of all. But tell us about all these robots.
At CES 2026, automation is moving from the novelty of years past to practicality. A range of robotic devices litter the show floor, offering to be your new chess partner or your private chef. Nosh, for example, hopes to sit in your kitchen as a robo-chef, using AI computer vision to ensure your meal is cooked to perfection.
And it has 500 plus recipes. Tell it you want to cook that meal. It'll walk you through the process. There's a water reservoir, an oil reservoir, a spice tray up here loaded up with spices.
I'll get the laundry started.
And LG expanding what it calls affectionate intelligence by way of its new Cloyd home robot, part of the company's zero-labor home vision, where intelligent machines handle home tasks like laundry, albeit slowly for now, as seen in this demo.
I facilitate convenience and comfort.
While no one would mistake any robots we saw here as actual humans, development is trying to get there. Zello Robotics created U-Skin sensor technology to improve the dexterity of robotic hands.
This feels very finger-like. This feels like skin.
So tactile sensing is one of the problems that holds robots back now. We don't want to replace humans, we want to assist humans. There are many tasks where it's very hard for humans to do them.
Technical limitations like slow speed and energy inefficiency, as well as high costs, are the main critiques of the humanoid robotics trend. But there's also the ethical and safety concerns when it comes to the technology tracking human patterns.
If it's taking assessments of all of the, my different moods and my habits and what I do day to day, what my kids do day to day, is all of that information and data secure?
Yeah. We have the model inside each of the robots. We don't upload the data to the cloud. Data is based on the robot, and so you don't worry about the data security.
If any of them say I'll be back, we won't be back. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Maura Barrett live for us from CES. Maura, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for spending some of your evening with us at Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have an excellent Tuesday night.